One of 7 siblings. John Henry might be specially qualified to speak on the question of what it means to love your brother. Though perhaps John Henry and Georgia are less difficult to love than Ivan and Dmitry Karamazov. To be serious, though, John Henry's thesis, sorry. Mr. Gleason's thesis comes from a deep, earnest desire to know what it would really mean, what it would really look like to love your brother in Christ. And found in Dostoyevsky's Alyosha, an example of that he believed we all have something to learn from, and I think he's followed that through with a beautiful and rich account of fraternal love in Dostoyevsky. So I'd like to meet you.
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking you, Dr. Cooper, for helping me throughout the thesis and oration process. I couldn't have asked for a better guide throughout the process, and your dedication is I'm very much thankful for it. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Olson, for being my second reader today and second panelist today. And Dr. Shields, I'd like to thank you all as well for being my third panelist. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today, but more than anyone, I'd like to thank God. So let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I'd like to begin my oration by asking you all to recall the Greek hero Achilles. Picture the broken man who sat, devastated on the Trojan beach, with tears streaming down his face, bewailing the loss of his immortality. A hero who understood he was meant for so much more, meant for the immortality of the gods, meant to be divine, but hopelessly divorced from that godlike power, cut off from it. A hero who rages against his mortality, against a reality that would separate himself from the divine, against a reality that would separate the divine from the corruptible, passing, finite. Opening the Brothers Karamazov, we are met by a character who has a strikingly similar disposition towards reality. We meet Ivan Fyodorovich Karamazov. Ivan sees a broken reality, one lacking order. Reflecting on evil, and in particular, the suffering of the innocent, he cannot understand how the divine, or God, has anything to do with our broken world. The two are divorced. He concludes that God simply does not exist. Furthermore, he argues that even if God did exist, his failure to justly order reality makes him not worth praying to. Again, driving home this point by focusing on the suffering of innocent children. In other words, Ivan cannot see how the divine, or God, is present in reality, or the suffering contained within it. Debating the issue of evil with his brother Alyosha, who has faith, Alyosha suggests that Christ is the solution to the problem, that Christ takes on the suffering of all. Ivan, however, rejects this solution in a poem he calls The Grand Inquisitor. He argues that Christ, in giving man so much freedom, failed to ensure the happiness of man in this life and made it unnecessarily hard to reach salvation. If nothing was a greater cause of suffering than man's free will, then Christ ought to have taken it away. Ivan then offers a solution to the problem of free will. it will suffice to note 2 points regarding the solution. 1, Yvonne would love humanity by taking away mankind's free will and imposing his own order. And 2, Yvonne will attempt living out this idea throughout the course of the novel. The first point allows us to understand how Yvonne is attempting to love. The second, where to look for the fruit of that love, for it ought to manifest itself in his relationships throughout the course of the novel. Now, this confrontation between a rejection of God's world and an acceptance of it is the dominant theme of the novel. However, Alyosha, his brother, who takes up the position of faith, does not respond to Yvonne with a counterargument. In fact, his only response is not much of a response at all. He simply leaves his brother with a kiss, and nothing more. As a result, many readers find the novel as a whole unsatisfying, not believing Yvonne's argument against God is ever answered. However, this is what we will investigate. 2 brothers, one with faith, one without it, both striving to love humanity as best they can. In this oration, I'll explore the relationship between faith, poetic vision, and fraternal love. To answer the question of why faith is necessary for a person to love fraternally. Analyzing the 2 brothers, Yvonne and Alyosha, I will argue that Yvonne's accusation against God is in fact answered throughout the course of the narrative, particularly through Alyosha's fraternal love. Now, before going any further, let us set down our definitions for faith, poetic vision, and fraternal love. Faith we will define as a knowledge of God. It is an acceptance of the divine order, as found within and through reality, believing it to be good. Poetic vision is the imagination's apprehension that things are not only physical, that they are more than what they are, that there is a deeper, unseen dimension to reality. Incorrect poetic vision is the imagination trying to escape the reality perceived through the particular, while correct poetic vision sees this unseen reality beyond the particular, which allows it to more completely see the particular itself. Fraternal love, properly understood, is love of God. It is an overflow of love for God that spills over onto other persons as indirect objects of love. These then will be our definitions for faith, poetic vision, and fraternal love. Now, I wanted to address this topic, excuse me, because I believe there's a prevalent misconception, especially within Christian society, concerning what it means to love your neighbor. In addressing the topic of brotherly love, some say that it is impossible to love everyone. Others satisfy themselves with a removed kind of love, claiming that in order to love your neighbor, it is enough to pray and wish for their well-being. Both of these attitudes result in a kind of distance when it comes to loving our neighbors, not to mention our enemies. I do not believe that love understood thus still deserves its title. Those that attempt loving in this removed manner are the Yvonnes of our world, striving to love humanity through an imposed order of their own and not through God's. They do not love their brothers and sisters as they really exist, but merely as an idea or kind of fantasy. Instead of continually indulging in this false love, I exhort people to love as an Alyosha of the world, to love people as they are, instead of fantasies. I'm not suggesting that we attempt loving everyone in the world, for this is not possible, but simply that we strive to increase our ability to love fraternally in whatever way that can be done. Now, before turning back to the novel, turning back to the novel, if we are to contrast Yvonne's ability to love his fellow man with Alyosha's ability, we must first consider their capacities to know the objects of their affection, for their love of something will be determined by their knowledge of it. Therefore, we will begin by asking and analyzing how it is we come to see poetically. Samuel Taylor Coleridge explores the moment that enables a person to know things poetically in his poem, The Rime of an Ancient Mariner, as he describes the mariner watching water snakes. Quote, "Within the shadow of the ship, I watched their rich attire, blue, glossy green, and velvet black. They coiled and swam, and every track was a flash of golden fire. Oh, happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. The selfsame moment I could pray, and from my neck so free the albatross fell off, and sank like lead into the sea. At first, the mariner cannot look at the sea or earthly reality without being appalled by the death and rotting found therein. In fact, earlier in the poem, he despises the creatures of the deep, calling them 1,000 slimy things. Neither can he look to heaven and comfort himself with prayer. It is only when he is willing to look within the shadow of the ship that he is able to exclaim, "Oh, how living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware." His knowing of the water snakes cannot be understood through words, but only as a spring of love which gushed from his heart. His perception or knowledge of them is a love of them. The moment depicted here, the self-same moment, is what enables a person to enter reality and begin knowing things so that they can love them. For remembering that knowing and loving were once one, as they are in this moment, a person increases their desire to unite the two again, the desire to know things deeply so that they can love them deeply. In this way, the moment strengthens a person's ability to go out into the world and know it. From this, we can also conclude that faith is necessary to experience the self-same moment. For faith, as we have defined it, is an acceptance of the divine order as found within and through reality. The self-same moment is only experienced in and through reality, which if a person is going to enter into and accept, they must first believe to be good. To make the claim that the self-same moment takes place in the lives of Ivan and Alyosha is perhaps a bold one. Yet Dostoyevsky reveals that he at least has an intuition regarding such a moment when he says, "Sacred memory preserved from childhood is perhaps the best education. A man stores up many such memories to take into life, then he is saved for his whole life." That sacred memory holds such weight in the mind of Dostoyevsky because it, like the self-same moment of the ancient mariner, enables one to go out into the world and know what lives within the shadows of reality. I believe the self-same moment takes place in the lives of Ivan and Alyosha as children. This scene is Alyosha's earliest memory, in which his mother, weeping, holds him up to an icon, entrusting him to Our Lady, enabling him to experience the simultaneous love and suffering of reality, blended together in a singular moment. Although Ivan is present in this scene, as Dostoyevsky later reveals, he does not enter into and accept the singular moment. Their two responses make all the difference in how they go forward in life, perceiving reality. One accepts the moment through faith, the other rejects it. One is described as an early lover of humanity, the other does not believe in people, he despises them. Because Ivan lacks the faith necessary to experience the self-same moment, he grows up lacking the poetic vision that it enables one to have. Because he does not have that sacred memory that Dostoyevsky recognizes as so crucial, he cannot go out into the world and know it poetically. We see proof of this when Ivan says, quote, "If I did not believe in life, if I lost faith in the woman I loved, in the order of things, were convinced in fact that everything is a disorderly, damnable, and perhaps devil-ridden chaos. If I were struck by every horror of man's disillusionment, still I should want to live, and having once tasted of the cup, I would not turn away from it till I had drained it. At 30, though, I shall be sure to leave the cup, even if I have not drained it." Ivan here is speaking as if hypothetically. However, this is the reality of his current condition at this point in the novel. Shortly, he will reveal that, in fact, he does not believe in life or in the order of things, and is continually struck by every horror of man's disillusionment. Yet despite all this, he still desires to live. Why then does he add that at 30, he shall be sure to leave the cup, even if he has not drained it? It is because Ivan relies on his youthful desire for life to overcome his every disgust with life. Once this youthfulness is gone, he will no longer have the ability to overcome the parts of reality that make it difficult to know. We see this youthfulness is necessary not only in reference to himself, but in order for him to love anything, when he says, "Though I may not believe in the order of the universe, yet I love the sticky little leaves as they open in spring. I love some people whom one loves sometimes without knowing why." All this reveals the fact that Ivan loves things in their freshness. before they have the chance to reveal something unsettling to him. Whether it is the sticky little leaves, a person whose imperfections have not been reflected upon, his own life, or, as he will later suggest, the uncorrupted innocence of children. He loves things before they have the chance to reveal something unsettling to him, and thus is only able to love them partially. This partial love reveals the fact that he cannot fully know the objects of his affection. William Lynch, author of Christ and Apollo and representative of the classical, metaphysical, and epistemological tradition, brings that tradition to bear on modern disorders of imagination and reason. He is helpful here, for he allows us to understand the partial knowing of Yvonne as an inability to know things poetically. Lynch speaks to the particular ways in which the imagination tries to escape reality, naming incorrect relations attitudes. One such attitude he names the double vacuum, describing it saying, "This imagination penetrates, at least to some degree, into our human flesh and environment. Then it recoils, with the weight of some emotion and judgment, such as disgust, boredom, or anger, and flies in a second movement that is unrelated to the first, and constitutes an act of rebellion and escape." This double vacuum is how Yvonne is attempting to know reality. He only wants to know the sticky little leaves before they mature, and not after. Whenever his imagination attempts to penetrate into his environment, whether that environment be the sticky little leaves, an unreflected upon act, a child's innocence, or his own life, he only chooses to do so shallowly. Because this results in his lacking insight, he cannot perceive the divine aspect of reality within the finite. The two are divorced. Instead of perceiving the divine through the particular, the shallow image he finds when he touches on particulars is a disorderly chaos. This means that he cannot perceive anything in its cannot love anything in its full context, for sharing in both a divine and finite reality, but only for being finite. And even this only when that particular fails to reveal an unsettling image. What follows from Yvonne's inability to know things poetically is a fruitless love, a love which does not deserve its title. Every relationship Yvonne has in the novel brings to light the same fact, that Yvonne can only love things in their freshness, out of context, before his imagination recoils. Some of those objects include people, some of whom include his father, his brothers, his romantic interest, his subordinates, all of whom can only be known shallowly by Yvonne, and his love follows suit. Even if we consider Yvonne's relationship with children in the novel, whose innocence makes them easier to love, we find that his relationships with children are almost completely lacking. The only relationship he has with a child is with Lisa, which is only implicitly narrated into the novel when Lisa tells Alyosha about Yvonne's visit. Yet even this one relationship exposes Yvonne's love as anything but fruitful. After Yvonne's visit, Alyosha finds the little girl wishing for her own destruction, craving evil, and fantasizing about crucifying children. Lisa had told Yvonne about her horrific crucifixion fantasy. Then she says, "He laughed and said it was really nice. Then he got up and went away. He was only here 5 minutes." The brevity of Yvonne's visit makes us aware once again of his inability to remain within the particular for very long before recoiling. Then, not only is he unable to relieve Lisa's suffering, but he actually increases her misery. Yvonne's visit leaves Lisa in a possessed state of mind, in love with disorder, hating everything and wishing not only for her own destruction, but the destruction of everything. Yvonne's love for her, without faith, increases her misery and debases her self-worth. In the end, it is completely fruitless. Yvonne's attempt to live out his idea, the idea that he can love humanity through his own imposed order, without faith, is not only fruitless, but actually destructive. It leaves him attempting to love while simultaneously desiring not to know, attempting to love from a distance. In the end, it is not love. Let us now turn to Alyosha, who lives out the faith that enabled him to experience the self-same moment, from which comes his ability to see poetically. Lynch says, Quote, who, if he were honest, would not be happier if he knew that beauty and understanding were completely contained within the literal, the plain, ordinary fact that meets the eyes and ears? The ideal solution would be that the world should signify without becoming less actual in doing so. Our hope must be to discover such symbols as can make the imagination rise indeed, and yet keep all the tang and density of that actuality into which the imagination descends. The first point we might make regarding the faithful Alyosha is that he is not attempting to know particulars that could fail to reveal a disturbing image. We find him at a funeral, enveloped in the stench of corruption, which is emanating from the decomposition of his beloved elder, Father Zosima. The freshness of Ivan's sticky little leaves is nowhere to be found. He enters into the pungent decomposition of his beloved friend. Instead of trying to avoid the corruption that Ivan sought to elude, Alyosha is thrown into it. He cannot escape it. In this way, he is in no way escaping the parts of reality that make it difficult to know, or as Lynch puts it, the tang and density of reality. Yet despite this overwhelming tang and density, Alyosha is still able to find symbols that can make his imagination rise. He's able to see poetically. We see proof of this when Alyosha comes out of the church where Father Zosima's body is laid and experiences this moment. The silence of the earth seemed to melt into the silence of the heavens. The mystery of the earth was one with the mystery of the stars. Alyosha stood, gazed, and suddenly threw himself down on the earth. He kissed it, weeping, sobbing, and watering it with his tears, and vowed passionately to love it. There seemed to be threads from all those innumerable worlds of God, linking his soul to them, and it was trembling all over, in contact with other worlds. In this scene, Alyosha is uniting the divine in the particular. The heavens symbolize the divine aspect of reality. The earth symbolizes the particular. No longer experiences the mystery of the earth as distinct from the mystery of the stars, but rather the two melt into one another, becoming one. He finds, as Lynch puts it, that beauty and understanding were completely contained within the literal, the ordinary, the plain fact that meets the eyes and ears. Realizing this allows him to embrace the earth, and in doing so find threads from all those innumerable worlds of God, linking his soul to them. Those threads are divinity's presence within the particular. Thus, he no longer perceives reality as distinct from the divine. Rather, his perception of reality becomes a perception of the divine. What follows from Alyosha's ability to know creation poetically is his profound ability to foster relationships. This is where I believe the answer to Ivan's rejection of God's world is found. It is not found through a rationally thought out counterargument. Rather, it is found in Alyosha's display of fraternal love through the narrative itself. Alyosha alone has a relationship with almost every major character in the novel, revealing that his ability to know people extends beyond just family and friends, reaching even complete strangers. One of the strangers Alyosha befriends is a young boy named Kolya Krasovkin, who is of particular interest. Joseph Frank, a professor of comparative literature, analyzes Book 10 of the Brothers Karamazov, titled Boys. According to Frank, Kolya is the manifestation and character that plays out the theoretical idea presented in the Grand Inquisitor. Take a drink of water now. Before being changed by Alyosha, Kolya could only love Alyosha as an inferior. Alyosha is his friend, and he is currently dying at this point in the novel. Every act of Kolya's love towards him served to reinforce his own superiority. Just as the Grand Inquisitor, in his Ivan's argument, uses the power of mystery to enslave the masses, Kolya uses the power of gratuity and magnanimity to keep a group of boys under his command. He remained aloof, removed, and controlling, until Alyosha compels him to stop attempting to love a fantasy and confront reality. The reality that this sick, dying boy needs the love of a friend. and nothing more. Frank writes, Kolya's need to dominate others and to control every situation in which he becomes involved mimics the aim of Ivan's creation, the Grand Inquisitor, to relieve humankind of the burden of freedom. But when Kolya comes face to face with the dying Alyosha, his posture of commanding self-control breaks down, and he gives way to his feelings of pity and compassion. In attempting to maintain his posture of command, the resistant and magnanimous spirit of Kolya is broken. Ivan's proud, rational argument breaks with Kolya's proud spirit. Ivan had demanded of the Grand Inquisitor someone who, this posture of command and self-control, someone who controls from a distance without real human affection. But Kolya's sympathy shows there's something within human nature that must give way to feelings of pity and compassion. This breaking of Ivan's argument, when manifested in the spirit of Kolya, is a motif of Ivan's inability to love without faith, a motif that is answered by Alyosha's display of fraternal love through the narrative itself. This fact becomes clear when we consider the final scene of the novel, in which the boys are gathered by Alyosha, who unites them around a rock. Robin Fuller Miller, a professor of Russian literature and author of Worlds of the Novel, analyzes the final scene of the novel, considering the group of boys that Kolya leads a bit more closely. In the final scene, Alyosha and this group of boys are walking back together from the funeral of their friend, Alyosha. The boys, led on by Kolya, were once enemies with Alyosha, but Alyosha befriended and reconciled them, convincing them to visit the sick boy on his deathbed. They are stopped on the path by Alyosha, who gathers them around a rock that Alyosha had once cherished while alive. Miller argues that Ivan's revolt is not only broken, but resolved in this scene, that no sense of incompleteness could possibly remain when the reader understands what is taking place in Alyosha's gathering of the boys. She writes, the 12 followers of Alyosha recall the 12 apostles of Jesus. Alyosha, recalling Jesus with Peter and the apostles, founds his living church, his brotherhood of children, by a rock. And their brotherhood is cemented by the very mortar that Ivan had earlier so eloquently refused to accept, the unjustified suffering of a child. Robin's reading of the novel is brilliant because she understands that the central conflict at the heart of the novel, Ivan's argument, is answered by Alyosha's descending into the particular as Christ descended into our particularity. She takes into consideration the fact that Alyosha, Kolya, and the 11 boys are gathered for the funeral of Alyosha. In other words, around the unjustified suffering of the innocent. Alyosha, by acting in imitation of Christ, is uniting the boys around the suffering, unveiling the sublime answer of Dostoyevsky to Ivan, Alyosha's Christ-like love. He descends into the particular, as Christ entered into our particularity, to unite us in his suffering, the suffering of the innocent. In doing so, by acting in imitation of Christ, Alyosha is infusing the particular with the divine, a particular filled with suffering, allowing us to return to Ivan's argument presented in the Grand Inquisitor. Alyosha had responded to Ivan's argument with a simple, seemingly insignificant kiss. However, if we pair the book of Ecclesiastes with Ivan's argument, the book of Ecclesiastes being the greatest reflection upon the suffering and problem of suffering mankind has ever seen, if we pair that with Ivan's argument, we begin to see something profound within seemingly insignificant. The book of Ecclesiastes is responded to by the opening lines of the Song of Songs. Quote, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine." Alyosha's insignificant answer is God's answer to all of humanity, God's kiss to the world, his incarnation. We see the full fruit of this Christ-like love in the final scene, when Alyosha addresses Kolya and the other 11 boys in a speech. He says, "Let us make a compact here at Alyosha's stone, and we will never forget Alyosha. Let us remember how good it was once here, when we were all together, united by a good and kind feeling, which made us, for the time we were loving that poor boy, perhaps better than we are. You know, there is nothing higher and stronger and more wholesome and good for life in the future than some good memory, especially a memory from childhood of home. When we recall how we buried Alyosha, how we loved him in his last days, and how we have been talking like friends all together at this stone, the cruelest and most mocking of us will not dare to laugh inwardly at having been kind and good at this moment. Alyosha is asking the boys to remember this moment, a moment filled with tang and density, the death of their friend, and yet simultaneously good and filled with love, because he recognizes that this is their self-same moment, what Dostoyevsky refers to as their sacred memory. If the boys can remember this moment, they will remember how their knowing Alyosha was the same as their love for him. This is the moment that enables a person to go out into the world and know it poetically. If the boys can remember this moment, they will remember how at the rock their knowing Alyosha was the same as their love for him. Alyosha is asking them to embrace this moment, for in doing so, they will embrace faith, a faith which has enabled him to cherish his own sacred memory, enabled him to enter into their lives and see that all of them are perhaps better than they are, that the divine is present within them. Because he has entered deeply into their lives, I can see that all of them are perhaps better than they are. He is able to look within the shadow of the ship, Coleridge's shadow of the ship, and ask them to enter into their own self-same moment, a moment that will enable them to see poetically, enable them to know things as sharing in a divine reality, so that they can love them for the sake of God, with a love that overflows from their love for God, with a love that is worthy of their brothers and sisters. This is why I asked you to recall the Greek hero Achilles, because in Alyosha we find a hero who understands he is meant for so much more, meant for the immortality of the gods, meant to be divine. But unlike Achilles, he is in no way divorced from that godlike power. He is exercising it through Christ-like love. We find a hero who no longer needs to rage against his mortality, because he does not see the divine as distinct from himself or the corruptible, passing, finite. We find a hero who, through Christ, has become divine, a godlike hero. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to open up to questions from the panel. Maybe Dr. Shields.
How does one love an Ivan? Is there any hope for someone like him?
That's a good question. I think actually we're like just on a basic practical level. We're all called to love Ivans. We don't see that many people do this. Many people try to escape reality in one way or another, try to avoid encountering the real in one way or another. I actually find him easier to love than a character like Theodore, who's just like completely debased, constantly indulging in the worst sorts of activities. Are you asking like how do we help him understand how to encounter reality, like how to love him in the way that Alyosha is loving the boys?
Well, ideally, but maybe we can't do that, and if not, what do we do?
If we can't love like through the ideal of making somebody aware that God is present to our world, in our world.
Mm-hmm.
I think primarily just by being a witness to the fact that creation is good, that in suffering that you can use suffering. Ivan will constantly doubt that suffering serves any purpose. That seems to be his biggest problem with God and his world, is that suffering doesn't seem to serve a purpose. Why is there suffering? if it doesn't serve a purpose, then why did God permit suffering to be so like prevalent to affect even little children? I think, yeah, just being a witness to the fact that you can use suffering, that suffering is redemptive, that if you're able to draw in close enough to it, that you can find something good in the worst things. By going out and just being a witness to that fact that in encountering suffering, you can actually bring good out of it, that in the suffering itself, there's something good. That even if your friend, Yvonne, doesn't believe in God, that he can witness you finding some sort of happiness within that suffering. I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit, it's been so long since I've read the Brothers K, but am I not right that there, at some point, there's another boy who's dying, not Alyosha at the end, and he has some kind of experience where he kind of comes out of it and says that, you know, the world, like, if only we can see it, like, we are already in heaven.
Yeah. That would be Markel, so Father Zosima's younger brother. That's actually interesting too, because I couldn't bring this all in, but that memory of Zosima and that younger brother, why he's in the novel, is because Father Zosima is remembering that as one of his earliest childhood memories. A moment which actually is beautifully linked by Dostoyevsky to, just to show the significance of why, like, why you don't take for granted that the small thing, like a childhood memory, can affect somebody for the rest of their life. He does this by connecting that scene where he remembers his brother, seeing the glory of God in all of creation. He remembers that, but he remembers it right before going to a duel, where he would have killed a man and taken a woman for his wife. Showing that the consequences to like something as small as that, something as small as seeing your brother who's dying, witness to the fact that the glory of God is all about him. And then like in linking that to the scene, he's able to show like the significance of even the smallest little action. Which I don't know if that got a point or if that was a total tangent.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly if I have anywhere I'm going, but
Sushi, the boat I'm in too.
what's that?
Usually the same boat.
You seemed like you knew where you were going. So why doesn't Ivan accept that memory? He said he was there when his mother was lifting Alyosha up.
Yeah.
What is it about it he doesn't accept?
I think it's actually his not getting close enough to it. He's not being entrusted by his mother to Our Lady. He's not experienced the simultaneous love and suffering. He's looking on as a third party in a distance way, kind of analogous to what he'll be doing for the rest of the novel, distancing himself through magazine clippings, through like stories, not getting close enough to the suffering to actually see that whatever God ordained this to be so, like, is actually good. And so he comes to the conclusion, right, that like, how could there be a God? My mother is weeping, holding her, like hopelessly holding up my brother to who? Like, that doesn't make sense. So I think he's primarily, I saw it as a rejection of faith, which I base that on the fact that like the rest of the novel, Yvonne completely lacks faith. And it seems to stem from, I think Dostoyevsky wants to suggest through the early childhood memory, the sacred memory, that it's from that moment that his inability to love comes from a rejection of God.
Thank you, Hiram. I'm hoping you can say a little bit more about what poetic vision means. You said, for example, I wonder if you can justify this. You said that they are more than what they are.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like you're touching on something in a poetic way, but strictly speaking, that seems like a meaningless sentence. So, can you justify that?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be more than what you are?
So I think the more than what you are comes in when through poetic vision, you're actually entering deeply enough into a given object to realize that it does share in a divine reality as well as a physical. That you're not just encountering the physical. And yeah, that they are more than what they are, because that divine reality you'd be touching on, that insight you're going to have if you're encountering something poetically, is actually more than what the object is in itself. In itself, a coffee cup, well, I don't know if you can have a poetic experience with a coffee cup, but in itself, it's just a physical object. It's not until you actually experience it poetically that you're made aware of that more. The coffee cup was a bad example.
When you experience something, are you experiencing something more than what is, or just what really is? Aren't you just seeing? Isn't the problem that some people just don't see?
No, I would have to concede to that it is just seeing more of what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have to call it poetic vision? Would you be opposed to calling it philosophic vision?
Yes, and here's why. When I turn to the Brothers K, the vision that seems to be lacking, or knowledge that Yvonne seems to be lacking, we can't attribute philosophic inability. Is, at least if I'm going to a poetic vision, which I believe it's poetic vision that's lacking, if I'm going to apply that to the novel, as seen within the novel, Yvonne does not lack the intellectual ability. His ability is actually quite strong. He goes to school and finishes. Alyosha is the one that doesn't. So it doesn't seem to be that kind of vision that's lacking, but rather an inability to have this marathon. Okay, I don't bring marathon into my thesis at all, or my oration, but he talks about it as an intercommunication between knower and the known object. And that seems to be what Yvonne is so incapable of doing. Going out and having that intercommunication between a given object and himself. He can encounter things through the abstract or philosophically. It's actually very smart that way.
I wonder is that a fair reading of the story, that one of the brothers, so Alyosha is a poet and Ivan's a philosopher, and that's why he goes to hell? Or
back on that.
can we say rather he's some kind of stunted philosopher, but that's not philosophy?
I don't think philosophy doesn't require, in one way, it does. In order to be a good philosopher, you need to go encounter things. But the encountering of them isn't what we're accentuating in the kind of knowing we're talking about. That would be more fully grasped through poetic vision, which is an ability to know by encountering or through encountering. So I think it is fair to attribute the knowing that we're seeing as lacking, or either present or lacking, as an inability to know poetically. Because in Alyosha's case, he's able to enter so deeply into the lives of his boys that heck, he's being bitten on the hand by kids he doesn't even know. And Yvonne is just, he never, for the one case that I brought up, and in that case also, to the brevity seen within the novel, the inability to actually remain in contact with things, I would attribute that to a poetic vision.
Is it the difference between the particular and the universal? Right, because the philosopher, right, the way Aristotle talks about, he does come into contact with reality, but then the intelligible and act and the intellect and act are the same. Right, kind of line there. This is Malo was talking about that the other day. But is it the difference between the universal and the particular that matters here?
That instead of trying to grasp the universal as found within, you're trying to grasp some understanding of the universal through the particular, that it's an encounter with particular things, that is what Yvonne lacks. That's what Alyosha is able to do.
I thought that's where you were going.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
And that's what you're saying is peculiar to poetic vision, is this always this orientation to, through, and certainly beyond the particular, but always to and through the particular.
Yeah, that it has to do with the individual child, not some story about a child you haven't encountered, not some abstract idea of what you imagine to be the case, but what actually is the case, who the child actually is. That's present too. I don't know if that helps.
A slightly different question, maybe related. it seems like part of poetic vision is being able to see the significance of things that is more than their matter, even more than what they are. There's some kind of an attendant significance to things. You see the bird means more than a bird. And I suppose if you're going to get that wrong, you could nail it. Maybe Alyosha nails that kind of sensitivity to the attendant significance of things. Ivan maybe is not sufficiently sensitive, right? Or he doesn't. If it's not there, he doesn't see it. Maybe, but maybe another way you could get this wrong would be to be fanciful, like to see everything as significant when it's not significant.
Yeah.
So do you think that's a question that the novel attempts to deal with, and it does?
Let's see. I might look to Madame Hoklakova. She says she loves the idea of man in general. The more she thinks about loving man in general, like her love for mankind is increased. The more she thinks about the idea, but then at the same time, she decreases her ability throughout that process to go and love individuals. So then it seems like in that case, her idea of what like individual people are supposed to be like is trumping or actually like making it so that she cannot go and encounter individual people. She actually ends up despising individual people because she has this fantastic idea of what people should be like or what they are, without it really ever touching down to the particular individual cases. If I were to put that somewhere in the novel, I'd probably pin it on Madame Hoklakova.
But such an attitude would for you be another way of evading this knowing through the particular that so distinguishes.
Yeah, so actually I believe we have like a lot of examples of people trying to escape reality in one way or another throughout the novel. I chose Ivan because he's probably the starkest contrast to Alyosha. And it was fun to read about him. So.
You say that in order to love our brother, we need to have faith. Does that mean that Christians can't love? That people who aren't Christians can't love? Sorry.
No, yeah, that's so it depends. On the one hand, I'd say if they don't have the faith I'm talking about here, no, they cannot love. But this faith isn't just specific to a Christian faith. It's a faith that the divine order is good. Whatever you believe that divine order to be, that's not to say that God is subjective. Your faith will be like defined by believing in whatever God did in fact establish this reality. The whole point is that you not escape this reality. But a person could, they could not believe in Christ specifically, but have this faith at the same time that the divine order is in fact good, and that going in and encountering it, entering into it, I should want to go out, encounter it, and know it. So it's not to say that you can't love. It is to say this, that you can't love fraternally if you're an atheist, and if you actually stick to your guns. But if you simply are like mistaking the identity or name of God, I'm still believing through this kind of faith that God exists, that his divine order is good, and you are able to love.
If you had philosophic vision, for instance, a truly capacious philosophic vision of the universe, you would affirm the divine order and be able to.
Yeah. Because you believe it to be good, so you want to go and know it, which is the necessary component for loving.
So Ivan is a stunted philosopher?
Ivan is stunted in a lot of things. Yes. Yes. I would say he's stunted because he's like stunted in his ability to go and encounter things. He's also stunted in his ability to see that God is good, that reality is good and should be known. He would be a better philosopher if he could go and encounter the stories he's reading about. If he could go and hold the little child after it's been tortured, he would be a better philosopher for that.
You also say that Alyosha doesn't flee from or turn away from any of the tang and the density and the roughness and the mixture of suffering into reality. But I remember a chapter where he seems to do precisely that. Can you?
Yeah, he does do precisely that. In fact, he if you've read the novel, you're probably like, oh my gosh. I couldn't fit a whole explanation into how he gets to the same place as Yvonne. Alyosha actually repeats the same line as Yvonne at a certain point in the novel. The line that it's not that I'm not believing in God, I simply reject his world. He repeats that same line, which was presented in the Grand Inquisitor, or after the Grand Inquisitor. So I simply couldn't fit it all into a 30-minute oration, but he does get to that low point of not seeing God's justice or believing that God is ordering reality properly. He's overwhelmed by, he expected Father Zosima's death to be one of like a miraculous revelation, miracles happening, and instead he was met by the premature rotting of his beloved friend. So he does get to that point. I'm not denying that fact. I think it's actually a kind of a beautiful thing that he gets to that point because it allows us to identify, in the way we identify with Yvonne, identify with him as well, begin following him as a reader. And it isn't until he rebels that he's able to actually go back to the church. So I skipped a whole scene where he leaves the church at first because he's disgusted, just like Yvonne, at reality. But I had to focus for the sake of the length of the oration on the fact that he goes back and he does in fact get to this point where he experiences creation poetically.
Dostoyevsky's narrator sort of says, a lot of people are going to blame my hero for this moment when he turns his back on God and his world. But I praise Alyosha that he is my hero in this moment. So what is so important about the fact that about what Alyosha goes through in that moment, and how is it connected to his capacity to love?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the narrator's praising him kind of for the same reason we would praise Achilles. Like, he's disgusted at reality, frustrated, angry with reality because he has this like fervent love for something. It's the amount of love that is being stunted by his inability to like connect the fact that it's good and he's loving. But it is his love that's the driving force for Father Zosima that is causing this rebellion. And I think that's why the narrator is praising Alyosha in this moment, which kind of seems analogous to why we would praise Achilles, because he actually like is so upset, so distraught at the fact that there's this disconnect. I don't see how the divine is actually present in me. Like it's distinct from me. It's distinct from all of this. So to get angry at that fact is actually a very beautiful and good thing.
And then
It should lead you to hopefully
to
understand.
Ivan also, something we admire, at least to a degree in Ivan, that when he saw the state that his mother was in and the helplessness of Alyosha, if he didn't turn against God in that moment, somehow at the bottom of it was. And is there a way to put all this together that moves to what Dr. Shields asked earlier, that is, how do we love an Ivan?
Putting it all together. Okay.
Because I think we, I mean, one way is to try to say, well, I think we do see Alyosha loving Ivan throughout the novel.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah. Yeah. Well, then we just look to what Alyosha does. What Alyosha does in the novel, he doesn't just disdain Ivan for his lack of ability to believe in God, that the order of the universe is good. He actually just listens to him. And at one point in the novel, he says, I want to suffer with you. No, continue your stories. Continue this argument against God, because I want to suffer with you. I think that's the key for people that don't understand how God is present in reality, is first to just identify frustrating, and they should be angry about it. If you're not able and justly ordering reality, you should be upset about it. And so what Alyosha actually does is he listens to him, he experiences with him, and he gets angry with him. He repeats that same line, which then allows him to have like the ethos, or like, and honestly, he gets angry to the point, I think, of maybe losing sight of, which I'm not saying to do that. But if we're able to identify by getting angry with the fact that there is this disconnect before suggesting that in fact the connection is there, that we actually can like perceive Christ's like being present in even something as like awful as the suffering of a child.
Other questions?
Luke.
Maybe for duration. This might be a bit of a silly question, but I read the book and I think to myself, I really don't want to end up like Yvonne, right? I don't want to have broken poetic vision, and I'm wondering if you could put a practical spin on your oration. How can you tell if you have correct or incorrect poetic vision, and if you think that you might be seeing the world in the wrong way, how would you go about fixing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think trying to be thankful for things is a good way of exercising your inability to see how they are good. That's just what I do in my everyday is like, if there's someone I really don't like, yes, you are here. I typically find myself needing to remind myself of why I should be thankful for that person. That like there are good qualities to them. And then that almost, not to try to drown out the parts that make them difficult to know, but make it easier. Like, you know, Alyosha experiences that moment of his mother holding him up to an icon. It's a mixed moment. It's not just suffering. I think if all he could see was that it was just awful, he wouldn't be able to like think back to it as a good memory, a sacred memory, right? So in the same way, like if you can pair the things in people that you don't like with good things about them, then suddenly you'll find that you're thinking about them in a way in which the two are mixed. It's a blended feeling, not just disdain, but actually like an acceptance for them. Yeah. Hey.
Hold on. I'm also trying to understand this poetic vision, specifically correct poetic vision. You say correct poetic vision sees this unseen reality beyond the particular, which allows it to more completely see the particular itself. So you're seeing beyond the particular, but then you're also seeing the particular. So I'm trying to just understand this and tell me if this is wrong. But what I'm kind of thinking of is maybe the setting of the particular. For example, the coffee cup. If you can just look at the coffee cup and say, oh, it's a coffee cup. Or you can see beyond the particular as like the coffee cup on the table, a bunch of books around it, and okay, maybe there's a student trying to study and prepare for his oration or something like that. All right, is that like the correct poetic vision, being able to see the particular in its setting and what that particular signifies?
Yeah, so I think the setting is probably important. I'd have to say that the setting is definitely important. But that's not what Lynch focuses on. He focuses on the fact that you have to move through this particular. He talks about it as a motion through given objects. That what we have to work with is the finite reality we are in. And that in whatever way we're going to encounter it, if we're actually going to be made aware of the divine through it, or led to an insight, it has to be through it. And otherwise we're falling into an attitude. And Dr. Wilson brought this up, that like there are many different ways of escaping that reality. You can attribute too much to given objects, or you can fail to see through them. So I think the setting is important. I think it has to do primarily with being able to look through the given object that you are encountering. If that makes sense. And you can't try to escape that. I don't know. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Susan.
We can fight about poetry and philosophy later. So early on in your oration, you said, we're trying not to love in a removed way, where we just say a prayer for the person and move on with our lives. And you also said it's impossible to love everybody with this sort of like really intense, close poetic vision. So trying to reconcile those both together, like if I get a Facebook message that somebody on the other side of the world is dying of cancer, what ought my response to be?
Right.
Kind of getting what you're getting at, but could you just clarify a bit more, like what is the idea? Like, is there a way in which we're called to love universally?
Yeah.
But what does that look like?
Mhm. Yeah, my intention isn't to like disown the importance of prayer. In fact, it's hopefully by the end of this understood to be like and the need for proper prayer, or like the increase of prayer, but properly done. I don't think what I'm wanting to or fighting against is this idea that like I don't want to know those people. Like it's nice that they're on the other side of the world, and like I'm just encountering them through Facebook, so I'll just pray for them. Like that's all I need to do. So it's not to like disown the importance of prayer. Prayer is very important, but I don't think you should be going to, I don't know, maybe this is too bold, but pray for somebody that you wouldn't want to see or encounter or be willing to encounter at all.
You don't think I should pray for my enemies?
That's an interesting way of putting that. Let's rewind a little. No, I just think there's a danger that comes along with justifying a removed form of loving somebody or a removed way of like benefiting them and not benefiting them. Prayer is good. If it comes along with the attitude that you're trying to avoid them.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps. So if you're turning to prayer because you don't actually want to encounter them, you don't actually want to know them, you don't have that desire. Desire should always be there. Oh man, I wish I had the ability to know my enemy. I wish that they weren't holding the gun so I could come up to them, give them a hug. If that's there, then there seems to be a disconnect in why we be praying.
Okay, so you're saying I shouldn't use universal love as an excuse not to get close to the person?
Yes.
But that I could still have like an imperfect. Yeah, okay. Great, thank you.
Margaret.
With poetic vision, when you're encountering reality, you have to encounter it with more than just sight. And if not, then can you love from just seeing things? Can you love things from a distance?
With more than just sight, you mean like by actually going in,
Like
interacting, hugging, touching?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Because your definition talked about sight, but vision. But is there anything more than just vision that has to be present when you're talking?
I think the experience would be definitely more full if you were able to actually like encounter, touch, like know the object that you're trying to know. I don't think it depends on that though, because the imagination is able to actually encounter and be drawn into knowable objects simply through sight. It seems like sight is a very necessary component there, because as soon as you eliminate sight, like if we go into sounds, then like you're hearing something, but your imagination, like, it's not going to be painting or able to penetrate through exactly what that is. It's going to actually be like creating what it thinks might be making that sound. So I think the experience is more full when you're able to actually encounter the given objects. Which is kind of beautiful because there's this moment in which a young boy experiences like, I'm just like finding an excuse to talk about the novel more. But anyways, this young boy experiences what his father later reveals in a different scene as the full weight or injustice of reality. That he understood everything and what it meant to like hate God, not believe in God because of the injustice. And that moment is linked to a moment in which at the moment he's kissing the hand of this man who's beating his father. And then later in the novel, Alyosha, not knowing the boy, enters into his life, and he comes up to him, and the boy rushes to him and bites him on the hand, cutting him to the bone. Which is, I think, Dostoyevsky's way of showing that, like, you can, like, in a way, partake or share in somebody's suffering. Like, Alyosha didn't know that the little boy had experienced, at that moment, he was kissing somebody else's hand. But then in a real way, Dostoyevsky is able to show how he enters into his life and actually takes on, symbolically, the suffering of that child. So I think there is like a real, I don't know, something definitely real to being able to encounter and get that close to. I think Dostoyevsky takes that to the extreme.
Thank you very much, Hiram. Thank you.